going on YouTube? I'm Lamont at large right now. I'm walking down Razor Road in Allendale, South Carolina. I'm here to talk about the very unscrupulous practices of one cave funeral home. They cut off a man's legs to simply fit him in the coffin so they could save themselves a couple dollars. I find it disgusting how such a dastardly act could be committed against such a remarkable and unique man that was James Hines. And when I say unique, that word is probably an understatement. A man who is 6'7", albino, a reverend, who's also a funk guitarist and legally blind. Well, unique is an understatement. So let's talk quickly about Mr. Hines' history. So he was born in New York, the third of 12 children. Now, later on, I believe his family moved down to the South, and he had went to a school for the blind down in Georgia. And I'm pretty sure he was unable to read. It was very, very difficult for him. He definitely couldn't drive. So you have a lot of things and factors working against you when you are such a unique person and such a standout when it comes to just being different than everybody else. Like I said, you're a kid, you're growing up, you're huge, you're albino, and I can only imagine that James might have had difficulties getting along with other kids. Kids could be cruel, kids, they say mean, dumb things. So I imagine that James found solace in the guitar. And since he probably, in retrospect, more than likely did a lot of time or spent a lot of time alone, he became incredible at playing the guitar. Now, I don't know if it's true that he was always by himself, but usually great guitarists, they spend a lot of time by themselves with the guitar, constantly playing over and over and over and over again. And that's what he did with his life early on. He had a group called J. Hines and the Boys. And as a young adult, they would play small shows and somewhat larger auditoriums around the Southeast United States. They cut a couple records. Actually, one of his songs in 1973, Camelot, actually reached number 73 on the top 100 R&B charts. So he had some moderate success as a musician. Me personally, if you're able to make a living as a blind musician, you are, in my opinion, every bit of the word success. If you could do what you want to do in your life and get paid for it. So he played these small clubs, these medium-sized auditoriums in this area throughout the late 70s into the late 80s. And then in the early 90s, he found religion. And maybe God called his name, maybe something touched his soul or what have you. And, he told his friends, the guys that he's been playing with for years, hey man, I'm hanging up, I'm hanging the axe up. And he later went to found a church here in the area. Now, he wasn't the one to really be a braggadocious person when it came to his music. And I believe a pastor of the church that he was attending had heard his recordings. And he knew that he was a musician and that he no longer played the guitar because he felt it was the instrument of the devil. And this pastor told him, he said, listen, James, the guitar is what you make of it. Why not use your God-given talents of being such an incredible guitar player, and you could use it for your work with the Lord? And he took James to a shop and bought him a brand new guitar. And, you know, throughout the years, James would play his guitar during church services. He would play for a local Christian radio station in the area.
Good morning, brothers.
Now, sadly, where the story turns a sour note, if you will, James had passed away due to skin cancer at the age of 60 in 2004. When the day comes when you have a loved one that dies, that is, in my opinion, going to be some of the most trying times ever of your life. And when that day unfortunately comes, you want to go to a place where they're going to take very good care of your dearly departed loved ones and show them the dignity and respect that they deserve. However, there is a very dark side of the funeral industry when it comes to these places, because at the end of the day, even though they are tasked with the responsibility of taking care of your loved ones, they're still a business, and they're still in business to make money.
It's full of love.
James Hines was a minister who died of skin cancer in 2004. This funeral home handled the burial for Hines's frame.
According to the measurement on the casket, and the funeral director, we asked him, was this suitable for his length? And he said, yeah, that'd be perfect.
But rumors started to spread that Hines's legs were cut so he could fit into a prepaid coffin. That led South Carolina authorities to exhume the body Tuesday, and what they discovered has sparked a criminal investigation 5 years after the man's death.
It's pretty tough to sit and look at something like that.
The county coroner would not say what exactly they found after examining Hines's body, but did say it was undesirable evidence. When asked about the investigation, the funeral home's owner had this to say.
The records will speak for itself.
Meanwhile, Hines's widow is in disbelief after finding out her husband of 31 years may have been treated this way.
I'm just going through quite a bit. This is just like starting all over again, and it has left me with hurt and numbness.
The county coroner says Hines has been reburied after authorities took pictures for evidence. Police say if the allegations are true, the funeral home could lose its operating license.
Now, Mrs. Hines chooses the Cave Funeral Home, which is right at around the corner from where I'm walking at right now. She goes to the funeral homes to start the arrangements for James's funeral. So the funeral director is showing her the different coffins and probably talking about different price packages that they offer. So she sees this coffin and she says, is this going to be big enough for my husband? Now, guys, let's not forget, James is 6'7". Now, if you break that down in inches, James is 79 inches tall. An average coffin is going to be 80 inches in length from the inside with the padding, right? So she looks at the funeral director. She says, you're positive that this is going to be big enough for James? He says, yeah, everything is fine. This is going to be a perfect size. Now, you would think that this guy who was selling this woman the coffin with the funeral plan would have simply told her, we're going to have to actually special order a coffin. And yeah, the price of the funeral is unfortunately going to go up, but the coffin has to be specially designed for your husband. So instead of him simply telling her, this coffin is going to cost you an extra maybe $3,000, maybe $4,000, maybe it was $1,000, who knows? Instead of doing that, they take James's body right into this funeral home, right where I'm walking to, put him on the table where they prepare the bodies for the funeral, get an electric saw, and they cut his legs off between the knee and the ankle. This is the Cave Funeral Home where that nefarious act took place. As you can see, now it is called BF Cave Funeral Chapel, existence 2010. And they've been in business, quote unquote, since 2010 because they lost their license in 2009. And as you can see right here, this looks to be a fairly fancy vehicle that they use for the funeral. So I would guess that this funeral home is able to afford these vehicles, that I would think that they're doing pretty good.
The man who he's the owner, and
Oh, I'm doing a story on them desecrating Mr. James Hines' body. That's why I was recording.
who?
Mr. James Hines?
The man who had the funeral at that time, he's deceased. This is a new owner now.
Oh, okay. Okay, but their name is still on the sign, Cave. So the new owner is
BF Cave. It's not
oh,
Cave
okay.
anymore.
So hey, he has nothing to do with Michael Cave.
No, Michael Cave deceased.
Oh, okay.
They're deceased.
Okay.
The dad, both of them deceased.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm still doing the story regardless. I don't mean to be rude or anything like that. I'm just walking.
You had talked to the new owner to come on the premises.
I didn't feel the need to talk to the
you
owner.
had to talk to the owner to come on the premises because it's a private business.
Okay, well, yeah, well, the story's pretty much already done.
No, that was a while when this happened. It's because this is a new owner.
Right, but I still do stories on where funeral homes do bad things to good people. So.
The person who was on it, both of them did deceased.
Okay, very
They're
good.
new owners.
Okay, thank you for letting me know, sir. I appreciate that. So as he said, the former owners of the Cave Funeral Home are no longer with us. I find it funny, however, that the name Cave is still on that property. This is Revelation Ministries. This is the church where the funeral for Reverend James Hines took place. Now, you have the day of the funeral. You have hundreds of mourners in this church paying their respects to a very, very well-loved individual, Reverend Hines. And as they're doing the service, this is an open casket viewing. And as people are in line, walking by the coffin to, lay their last sight upon Reverend Hines, a murmur starts spreading in the church during the service that something doesn't look right. Again, to remind you guys, when James was wearing shoes and walking around in town, I mean, he was almost 7 feet tall. He was 6'7", bare feet. Actually, me doing my vlog, I ran into somebody who knew him, and he said this guy was a giant. He was huge. And people are looking at the open coffin, and they're saying, like, this doesn't look right because his torso is long, and he's a big guy, but the bottom part, which is closed, it looks short. It just doesn't look right. And of course, his wife is grieving. She just lost her husband. And possibly maybe nobody wants to upset her. Maybe nobody told her what was taking place, what was going on. So after the funeral, they take him to his gravesite and they bury him. But in a town with no more than 4,000 people, I mean, any kind of drama that happens, everyone's going to be talking about it. And here come all of the people. Did you see the coffin? I was at the funeral and something didn't look right. The coffin looked too short, and the open part of the casket, it was long, but then the bottom part where his legs were, it looked short. And then you just start hearing people say, like, if I didn't know any better, I would have said they cut his legs off. And again, nobody knows what the people at the Cave Funeral Home did. And rumors keep going on and on and on and on and on. Finally, she goes back to the Cave Funeral Home and she says, something's not right. The coffin looked weird. She recalls noticing the same thing, but in her grief, that's the last thing she wants to worry about is them desecrating her husband's body. So she tells the owners of the funeral home, Michael Cave, at the time he was the owner, his father, Charles Cave, was the one that got the electric saw and cut off his legs between the ankle and the knee. She tells him, I'm going to sue you. Now, being a small business owner, you don't want any bad publicity. You don't want your name out there for people to read about all these nasty things that you're doing. So eventually they settle out of court under the stipulation that Mrs. Hines does not tell anybody how much they settled out of court for. So whatever money she gets, she takes it, and this story just kind of fades away into existence. That is until you piss off one of your employees. Cave Funeral Home does have a record of unscrupulous practice in their business. Now, when you're doing things such as cutting the legs off of bodies to fit them in a coffin, at bare minimum, you might want to keep your employees happy. Well, according to the story, one employee, angry about something, went to the board of funeral directors in South Carolina. And he said, hey, I used to work at Cave Funeral Home. And while I was working there in 2004, a man by the name of James Hines was brought to us by his family to take care of the final arrangements for his funeral. When we had him, he wouldn't fit in the coffin. We measured him, and guys, mind you, he weighed 300 pounds. Moving 300 pounds, very, very, very difficult. So he says that Charles Cave, the father of the owner, Michael Cave, by all intents and purposes, from what I've read, Michael Cave did not know that he was doing this. But who knows what the real story is at the end of the day. He says, listen, we're going to have to order another coffin because he can't fit in the coffin. And Mr. Charles Cave says, no worries, I'll take care of it. He grabs a electrical saw and just proceeds just to cut the legs off of poor James. After he cuts off his legs, he simply just throws it in the coffin. That's it. And during the service, we're not particularly worried about it because it's an open casket, but the other end of the casket is closed. So the board hears this and they go in town and start talking to people. They interview the wife and she confirms that there was an out-of-court settlement for me not to disclose any of the monetary compensation that I received from the Cave Funeral Home. So, with that being said, there is a law in South Carolina that the desecration of a corpse carries up to a 10-year prison sentence. So with the information from the former employee and with the help of sheriff's investigators and the medical examiner's office of the county, in April of 2009, they began their investigation of the Cave Funeral Home. And this is the final resting place of Mr. Hines. So they come here to the cemetery, exhume the body of Mr. Hines. Now we're going to find out if the rumors are true. They exhumed his body, opened the coffin, and it basically took 30 seconds to see that the rumors were indeed true. They took his body, they placed him in a new casket, and they buried him again in the same grave. And this here is the grave of Reverend James Hines. It's odd how the Cave Funeral Home name is still on the plate. Hopefully we can get that changed, because we don't want that name of that ungodly funeral home on this man's marker. Now, I don't know why there's no marker. People don't make markers for different reasons. Sometimes it's financial. In this case, it's not. Maybe when his wife, her time comes, maybe they'll just do one marker. That could be possibly it. But rest in peace to Mr. Hines. You know, a remarkable man, even though many people have never heard of him. Most of us have not. But because of this awful and tragic story, his name came into the news. But other than something foul happening to his body, which he no longer is in, it is only but a shell of what we once were. And this man was an awesome guitarist. And listen, I'm just going to throw this out there. What if he wouldn't have found God? Who knows? He could have hit it big. You never know. Getting paid to play music, regardless of if you're making $1 million or $10, it's still a fantastic thing. And this man, by all intents and purposes, was a great man, a great father. And I spoke to somebody as I was walking the neighborhood of that funeral home. And they grew up with one of his sons, and they just said that he was a good father, is what they said. He was a good man. And even though he was born with adversity, you know, he was legally blind. He could read, but he couldn't legally drive a car, so he never drove. But it's amazing how he was able to master the guitar, and just a very unique individual, to say the least. Rest in peace to this man, a great man that many of you probably never would have heard of if you didn't watch this video. So what ended up happening to the Cave Funeral Home after this debacle? Well, they were temporarily shut down, and the funeral home owner, Michael Cave, was fined $500 plus $1,500 in the cost of disinterring and reinterring Reverend James Hines. Later on, the funeral home was allowed to temporarily open back up. They went through haggling with the court system. Eventually, Charles Cave Sr. passed away in 2006, and the owner, Michael Cave, passed away in 2013. Now, you seen earlier that the name on there is BF Caves. I'm imagining it is owned by one Benjamin Cave, who actually knows who's running the show. All because your name is affixed to a sign does not mean that you are running the program. I want to end the video with this. What the funeral home did with cutting James's legs off just to fit him in the coffin was wrong. It was sick. It should not have been done. I cannot judge on whether they should have lost their license forever, but it is not illegal to take a funeral home and sell it or give it to a family member. Oftentimes, most And when I say most, I mean dang near all. Funeral homes all over the country, in particular the smaller ones, the family-ran funeral homes, it's always a family business. It is always a family business. Hardly ever does somebody just buy a funeral home. It's handed down from generation to generation. I don't feel that the K funeral home should be avoided or chastised, what have you. All I say is this. Whenever you need the services of a funeral home, always do your due diligence in looking them up to see if there's any misdeeds that has occurred in their record. You might want to look up Google reviews or whatever platform that you use to look up the reviews of whatever businesses that you might be giving your hard-earned money to. And last thing, to any of you dirty funeral homes out there, you desecrate people's remains and just doing ultimately wrong at the end of the day, I'm going to be on to you. I'm going to be on to you. Live but not live, but still alive by the grace of God. I'm Lamont at large. Thankful that I have health and well-being to be able to travel all across the country, telling you these stories that maybe you would have never heard of if it wasn't for me. And a big shout out to Scarlett for helping me on this video. She did a lot of work, of course, on this, and a lot of research. I will see you guys on the next vlog. Be good, y'all. Peace out.